Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for letting me speak today about the proficiency testing scheme that took place at the Pirbright Institute. I will be talking about both the 2016 and 2017 results, although I must emphasize the 2017 a bit more. I just firstly like to start by thanking all the members of the WRL team that helped to put together this PTS. And as you can see, there's actually quite a large number of people that have various input into this panel. So what is the purpose of the proficiency testing scheme? Well, it's to assist the national FMD laboratories to develop and improve the accuracy and reproducibility of their FMDV diagnostic tests. So we don't only do this through the PTS, but we also do that by training and consultations. We also realize that a lot of laboratories require a PTS for their quality assurance requirements, which includes, of course, the ISO 17025. And we also like to use the data to help in harmonization amongst laboratories, which we not only achieve by the feedback that you should have all received by now for the 2017 exercise, where you can see how your results compare to other laboratories, but we also distribute reagents and protocols. So the panel for 2016 and 2017 were actually very similar. So panel 1 was your outbreak scenario, where we gave you either FMD virus infected or FMD virus non-infected samples. Panel 2 was given to look at whether or not you can use your diagnostic assays to detect the latest strains. Panel 3 was split into 2. So one talked about outbreak scenarios. So this was a continuation of panel 1. And panel 3 was again more about QA, so whether or not your diagnostic assays can detect various serotypes. I should note that the PTS panels also includes swine vesicular panels as well as samples. However, I will not be talking about that today. The quality assurance that we go through is that all of the strains are isolated from the field and are sequenced, and all the serology samples are from experimental studies, and therefore we know what the animals were infected with. We also carry out 10 times testing for all of the diagnostic types. This is just a map of the participants from 2016 and 2017. We now have about 74 countries that participate. What this map actually doesn't show is that we also have a lot of industry that now participates in the PTS, and we also have certain countries in which more than one laboratory participates. The solid lines, or the solid colors, are laboratories that participated in both years, and the dashed lines are ones in which they participated only in one or the other year. I should mention that there's really 3 ways in which people are funded for the PTS. One is if you're a European Union lab, you get it as part of your national reference laboratory status. However, we also receive funding from the FAO through EuFMD for both the OIE FAO reference laboratory as well as some strategic countries. And of course, there are also other countries that pay for these panels and are self-funded. So to go into the results, I'm not going to go into great detail because you should have all received the feedback letters, and I have a very short amount of time. So I really just highlight the key messages for each one of these panels. So panel 1, unlike the last time that I spoke at EuFMD, is now available as both infectious and non-infectious samples. And this is really a chance for you to use your national contingency plan of what you would do if you were presented with a possible FMDV suspect case. So we expect countries to use your contingency plan to work through those samples. And therefore, it may not be necessary for laboratories to test all of their assays. Again, this is dependent on what your contingency plan is. And the test that most people use is virus isolation, if they're receiving the infectious panel, antigen ELISA, and real-time PCR. Unlike the previous time I talked about this, we are now also accepting sequencing data because we do realize that is a lot of people's, part of a lot of people's contingency plan. So this panel was amazing, actually, for 2017, where all laboratories that received this panel correctly identified FMDV, either by virus isolation, real-time PCR, and antigens. Just a little note to remind you that you can use the scenarios that are given to help you with what assays you need to use. In a real situation, you would have some information on the samples that you're getting from the field, and so for this is really to help you in determining what we have given you. And this will be especially important for this year. So I'm going to repeat that over and over again to use the descriptions that are provided. So panel 2 is our quality assurance panel. That's only available as non-infectious. Therefore, the 2 assays that people use are the antigen ELISA and the real-time RT-PCR. And this is really to see whether or not you can detect the latest strains that are currently circulating. I've just listed the samples, the strains and the lineages that we used for 2016 and 2017. And I hope by looking at the lineages, you will now see why we have chosen these based on the talks that I've given not only by Don King on the first day, but in subsequent talks as well. And what we really try to do here is pick the strains that are threatening Europe. However, we do not say which serotypes you must test against the samples. So it's up to individual countries to decide what strain and lineages are endemic in their area and what risk they may have from surrounding or even further away countries in regards to the strains. Therefore, if we do include a SAT2 strain, for instance, but you do not have a SAT2 ELISA, for instance, you will not be penalized for that. If you need help in determining these things, I'd just like to remind you that there is now a pragmatist tool. This is used for vaccine selection, but can also really be used to start looking at the risk that you may have in your countries from FMDV strains. And there is a workshop on that tomorrow with Don and Melissa from EuFMD. But again, if you're interested in any of this, you're more than welcome to email us at any time. So again, there was continued improvement on this. The antigen ELISA shows less cross-reactivity than it has in the past. It was also very nice to see that more laboratories are determining serotypes as pan-FMD instead of as negative, and this is largely due to the commercial kits that are now available that allow you to look for pan-FMD. Again, for 2017, all laboratories correctly identified FMDV, which I think is a really great step forward. I should mention that there were 4 laboratories that incorrectly identified negative samples, and that is definitely something to look about, to discuss with those labs to see how we can improve that situation. Panel 3 always causes the most headaches, and I think we've had a lot of discussion over the years about this one because of some of the issues involved in serology. So I'll just spend a little bit more time on this, but these are the various assays that people are using. Still by far the most popular assay is the non-structural protein ELISA, followed by the VNT. Of course, that can only be done if you can handle live FMDV virus, which is why it's very limited, and why you'll see the same number of labs carrying out the VNT every year. And then we see a lot of kits, and over the years we see more and more commercial kits on the market for these type of kits, and there's definitely more laboratories that are using not only one kit for this, but actually various kits to assess how they are performing with this. Just to go into a little bit more detail with the NSP, we've split down the NSP into the various different ELISAs, and you can see the difference from past years in that there's, again, more and more kits available on the market, and these kits are being used by the various laboratories. So for panel 3A, this was a continuation of the outbreak scenario. So you should have used the information in panel 1 to help you determine which serotype to use for this panel. And that's really, really important because we know how cross-reactive these serology panels can be. So we give you clues, such as that a monovalent vaccine was being used. Okay, so if the outbreak in panel 1 was serotype O, then the serology kit that should have been used for this would be serotype O kits. I am not going to make, or we are not going to make this very complicated and make it a situation where you have vaccinated with the wrong serotype or where you suddenly have an incursion of another serotype. This is very straightforward. So please, please, please use the description, and we're not trying to trick you. And also remember, this is experimental serum. So we know that these animals have only been infected with one type of FMDV. So in 2017, people got that message to only use the serotype kits that were relevant, or the serotype kit that was relevant for the particular outbreak. It is very interesting, and I'm not quite sure why this has happened for the last couple of years, in that people are very good at determining the serotype based on the kits, but when it comes to the overall conclusions, they often make it a lot more complicated and will take in consideration some of the cross-reactivity that they may have seen with the kits. So I just remind you to look at the scenario and really think about whether or not you would be able to determine that an animal was infected with one serotype and actually vaccinated with another. It's a very difficult statement to make, and it's not something that we would actually consider for the PTS. Panel 3B, which is your quality assurance panel, is probably the most difficult panel, and I do realize that for the PT. And again, this has a lot to do with the cross-reactivity. Again, use your scenarios, because we have clearly written here that it's Asia 1 or A. So it's not likely that these animals have been vaccinated with A and there was an outbreak of Asia 1, or that there was some kind of dual infection, okay? Again, we're not trying to trick you. These are hints, because we know that Asia 1 is actually quite cross-reactive with some of these samples. It was really, really good to see that all laboratories correctly identified NSP-specific antibodies, no matter which kit they used. And I think it's actually a nice follow-up from Claire's talk before mine, that there are various commercial kits now available, and there's more kind of a spread if there was an outbreak to draw upon those kits. We did have 4 laboratories that incorrectly identified negative samples, so again, that's something that we need to look at. Should mention these are different labs than the ones we talked about previously. And again, we had this issue where, although individual serotypes were correctly identified with the various assays, the overall conclusion included multiple serotypes. This could be a question of cross-reactivity, and I'll go on to that in my next slide, but I think it may also be where people are using various different kits and they don't quite know how to combine the data if it's positive on various serotypes. Perfect. So there is a poster on cross-reactivity this year by Alison Morris that I'd recommend you look at, just very briefly, and I've just shown part of the data. The top in red are all experiment animals that were infected with serotype O. The bottom in blue are all experiment sera that are serotype A, okay? So we know what these animals are. And what we've done is we've tested them on 3 different kits, and we've tested them against all the serotypes that are available for those kits. So even though if we were just to look at this first panel here, you can see that the majority of samples are O. You can see up here above the red line that there's a lot of samples that are actually positive against multiple different serotypes. Okay, so this is caution to be very careful about cross-reactivity with these kits, and we see it across the board. We're still finishing the analysis of this, but I'd recommend you go look at the poster for more information. And that's where I'll leave you. I do have one more slide after this, though. I'd just like to thank the World Reference Lab, who put a lot of effort into this, the Central Service Unit, who supply all of our cells, the Proficiency Testing Scheme Advisory Board, who helps with all of the descriptions for the panel. Also you, of course, for participating. Our funding, which is from EuFMD and the EU. And again, if you have any questions about past PTs or future PTs, you're also always more than welcome to email me. One last slide is what is happening for 2019. So as most of you probably know, from January 1st, 2019, the European Union PTS will be carried out by our colleagues at ANSES in Ciancio. Okay, so if you're an NRL, so National Reference Lab in Europe, this is where your PT will come from. Currently, we don't have a budget for the FAO and the self-funded PTS for 2019. However, there haven't been any final decisions on this, and it's not yet clear what we will do. but we would really like your feedback as to how useful you find the PTS, so that we can determine how we want to move forward. And that is it. Thank you very much.